Patch 6.25 has been out for a few days now, and with it came our first variant and Criterion dungeons. Now, I've been very excited for this release, as when it was first introduced, it seemed to be exactly what I've been wanting in Final Fantasy XIV for a very long time now: challenging light party content. I know that Deep Dungeon exists and the higher floors are a bit of a challenge, but it wasn't really the style of content that I was looking for, I guess you could say. However, the Criterion dungeons are exactly what I have wanted. I was a bit skeptical at first when they added the Savage name tag on the second difficulty, but after having stepped foot in there, I'm honestly okay with that label. So let's then talk about these Variant and Criterion dungeons. What are they and what do they offer in terms of rewards? Let's go over them in the order that you unlock the content. The Variant dungeon is basically story mode. You get to enter it alone or with a party of up to 4 players, and your team composition also doesn't matter. You get to choose 2 variant actions before you go in to make up for the missing roles in your party. So if you were to run without a healer, you can bring a healing action. If you're running without a tank, you can get a very strong version of Rampart, and if you don't have a DPS, then you can bring a strong DPS skill. So regardless of your composition, the dungeon will take around the same time to complete. You also need a very low item level to enter the dungeon, so I took the opportunity to play some jobs that haven't seen much playtime from me, purely because they just didn't have much gear. So this was the perfect time to play around with them again. When you enter the dungeon, you get to choose 1 out of 3 major paths that will lead you down a different section of the dungeon with its own bosses. The first boss is the same on all 3 paths, although he does have slightly different mechanics for each route that you take, but the second boss is unique in each route. And something that I also thought was really cool is that both the first and second boss can get new mechanics depending on the choices that you make along the way. Now, to fill out your journal or book, whatever it's actually called, which in turn rewards you with a mount, you need to run the dungeon a minimum of 12 times. More than that if you're trying to figure out all of the secrets yourself. So having the bosses change a little bit depending on your choice was a good thing, as it kept them a little bit fresh each time that you encountered them. It isn't just the same thing over and over again, as you are repeating them to try and get all these journal entries. There's also a 4th secret boss that you can unlock if you do certain things in a very specific way, which I certainly wasn't expecting. So it's safe to say that the Variant dungeon ended up being much more enjoyable than I first was expecting it to be. The rewards for it are also alright. You get a mount for completing your journal, and you also get a currency that allows you to buy some glamour from an NPC, as well as an emote. There are also minions that you can obtain, but these are random drops, so you need to get a little bit lucky with them, although they can be sold on the market board. So if you're unlucky with the drops and you have some gil to spend, then you can grab them from there. So overall, I enjoyed the Variant dungeon a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I think that the rewards are fine as well. Once you're done with the Variant dungeon, you can then move on to the Criterion dungeon. This one is structured more like a normal dungeon. You start with some trash mobs, which you need to clear out before you can head to the first boss. After the first boss, there is more trash before you reach the second boss, and then after beating the second boss, you can go straight into the third boss. Now, what I thought was really cool is that the trash is actually dangerous. They hit hard, and they also have attacks that you need to learn how to dodge, as they have a very brief AoE indicator that is too fast to dodge in most cases if you're just reacting to the telegraph. I quite like this, as the trash sections of most dungeons are just plain boring. Pull them together, AoE them down, and move on. Here you need to be careful with pulling the mobs, maybe pulling them into a certain place where it would be safe for you to fight them, and then you take them down carefully before moving on to the next one. Kind of similar to fighting mobs on the higher floors of the deep dungeons. The bosses themselves are also quite a challenge. They're certainly around the difficulty level of an extreme trial fight or even an early Savage boss, so it definitely didn't disappoint. There's also a few mechanics that certainly took some time to figure out, with all of the different permutations that were possible for some of them, so it certainly felt like an actual Savage dungeon, and that is something that I have wanted for such a long time, so I've been really happy with that. The minimum item level requirement also isn't too high, so if you get your alts geared up a little bit or you just buy crafted gear for them, then you're also good to go. But do keep in mind that gear matters in here. So it's not like best in slot is going to be useless in here. It'll definitely help you out, because after we did a few clears, our 2 DPS players swapped onto jobs that they actually had best in slot for, and we started killing the bosses quite a bit faster. But it's certainly not needed in order to clear it, as even when you're playing with the lower item level jobs, we were still skipping mechanics towards the end of the fight. So I like it that it's challenging content, but you don't necessarily need to farm out best in slot in order for you to enjoy the content. So you're not locked into playing your main jobs that you are already playing for your Savage raids, and you can have some fun on alts as well. The rest system is something that I really enjoyed as well, and it is something that I've actually mentioned in a video a long time ago, that it would be really cool if they would do something like this in the future. Resing in Final Fantasy XIV is incredibly strong, even more so if you bring a red mage or a summoner that can help out. You can quite literally zombie mode through some encounters, providing that you have the DPS to clear the enrage, if there even is one in the first place. But that's something that I don't enjoy whatsoever. It also means that casters that bring a res are usually more valuable to take, because if you're just looking to clear something, then having those extra reses as a backup is usually better than having a little bit of extra DPS. Depends on the encounter, of course, because in some fights having a res is pretty useless, but on most it's a very powerful tool. I also don't like how it's always down to the healers, if you don't have a caster that can res, of course, because it drains your mana, and if you have to raise one too many times, you could quite literally just be standing around doing nothing, because what little mana you might have left is needed for healing purposes or something, and that's not fun gameplay. The way how they handled reses in Criterion is exactly the same way how it works in Destiny 2. Each party member has one res token that they can use, and that's it. The raise itself is also a normal GCD, so no 8 or 10 second long cast time, however long a normal res is, just a normal 2.5 second GCD, and you're good to continue. This takes away the burden on your healer and it spreads it to the entire party, and I would honestly be fine with them doing this for Savage raids as well, because usually if you have to raise 8 times, then you'll probably be wiping anyways, or you're going to be hitting enrage. But even though I might want that, I know that the chances of that happening are basically non-existent, but one can dream. The last thing about the normal mode Criterion dungeon is that each boss also has an enrage, but the enrage isn't that tight, because as I mentioned before, even with 2 of our DPS players pretty much at minimum item level, we were still skipping mechanics. The rewards for the Criterion dungeon are a bit lackluster though. You need to clear 4 times to buy both the Orchestrion roll and the Adventurer plate item, and then there is also a mount that you can get from this difficulty. It is a random drop, but if you are unlucky then you can buy it after 25 clears. So if you want everything, you need to clear the dungeon 29 times. Again, just like with the minions from the Variant dungeon, the mount can be bought off the market board. So if you don't want to run 25 times to guarantee yourself the mount, then you can buy it from there. Or alternatively, if you don't like the mount, you can just sell it, as it's currently going for quite a hefty price. So if I end up dropping a mount, then I am certainly selling mine, as I'm not a huge fan of this mount. Any other currency that you might have left over can be traded in for some materia if, for example, you're going for bonus runs, or for example the mount ends up dropping and you don't want to continue on to guarantee a second mount to sell on the market or something like that. You can just trade in those tokens for some materia. So the rewards are kind of meh. I would have loved to see maybe an alternative way of getting the tombstone upgrade items, because those are going to be coming from the 24-man raid and hunts soon enough anyways. So why not reward us with them here as well, as this is content that is certainly harder than a 24-man raid, or maybe even an alternative source to gear up our alts. Not talking Savage level gear, but maybe something that is on par with the item level of what the next 24-man raid would give you. I would have certainly been happy with that. Instead, because of the lackluster rewards, the only reason I am doing normal mode is to practice for Savage, or to just have some fun running the content with friends. Certainly not doing it for the rewards, which means that a lot of players that might struggle with clearing the dungeon might just not bother, as there is no good reward for their struggle, and the main reward, which is the mount, can be bought from the market board. But what about Savage? As for the dungeon itself, there are very few differences between normal mode and Savage. The main difference being that you cannot resurrect anymore, a wipe will reset the whole dungeon, so you start at the beginning and everything respawns as well, and the dungeon itself now has an enrage timer as well that will start its timer the moment that you pull the first mob. So because of this, you can't really wait around too long for cooldowns to come back. You want to be pulling as fast as possible, so you might want to plan your CD usage a bit more when thinking about the trash mobs as well, and not just the bosses. The mechanics of the dungeon are still the same, although it did feel as if the trash mobs had slightly faster cast times now, but I'm not 100% sure about that, to be honest. I haven't gone back into normal mode after trying out Savage, but what I can say is that the main trash mobs no longer have AoE indicators. So in normal mode you get a brief indicator to show you what the attack looks like. In Savage you just need to know now, and the mobs also hit way harder, so it's important for your tank and healer to stay on top of things. HP seem to be about the same for the trash, but it will die slower because your healer will need to babysit your tank a little bit more. The bosses didn't really change in terms of outgoing damage or faster mechanics or anything like that, they just have more HP now. If I had to guess, it's probably around 15% more or something compared to normal mode. So if there are certain mechanics that you might be skipping in normal mode because you're doing it on jobs that are best in slot, for example, then you might just want to go back into normal mode and stop DPS to learn the final mechanics of the bosses first before heading into Savage, because the chances are that you will have to do those mechanics on Savage. Outside of that, there are no differences, so you can run normal mode a bunch of times to get confident on the mechanics of the bosses as well as the attack patterns of the trash, and then you can head into Savage. As for the rewards, you get an earring, a housing item and a title. The earring is so tiny that even if I were to look at it with a magnifying glass I just can't see it, and the housing item is also kind of meh, so you're really just doing it for the title in my opinion. Sure, you can buy materia with the clear tokens as well, but if I wanted materia then I would just jump on a hunt train where I can get multiple materias in a few minutes time instead of running a 20-minute plus dungeon where I can't make any mistakes or I need to restart from the beginning for just one materia, because you get one clear token at the end of the dungeon which you can trade for one materia. So it's certainly a one and done kind of deal. A little bit unfortunate in my opinion, but it is what it is. I can understand that they mainly wanted people to interact with the normal mode, and then Savage is a place where you can show your mastery of the content and then you get a title for that. But I would have preferred that both normal mode and Savage had a bit more longevity to the content. Normal mode is mainly there to practice for Savage, and during that practice you will most likely get all of the rewards from the shop, and then you clear Savage once, and then now you're waiting for the next Criterion dungeon to come out in a few months from now. So for me, the content itself, both the variant and Criterion dungeons, are great. It's exactly what I've wanted added to this game for years now. It's just that if they make any changes going forward, then I would like to see some better rewards for clearing the Criterion dungeons, both normal and Savage. So that's kind of everything that I wanted to say. Let me know if you've tried your hand at Criterion and what you think of it, and what are your thoughts on the rewards that can be obtained from the dungeons. Let me know down below. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.